You need leaders that are benevolent and hyper-aware and intelligent but also logical and caring. So basically no human can apply. Any human who does should be held in extreme suspicion. This reminded me of some old dude who claimed to have been part of the Philadelphia experiment and that he time-hopped a bit. Claims the furthest he went in the future was a socialized society that was run by AI because humans couldn't pull it off. He claims that anyone who didn't want to live that way was free to go off and live and provide for themselves in the wild. He also claimed that something happened which the creators of the AI had not foreseen, and stagnation in human innovation. I don't buy the story, but it was interesting regardless. Everything wrong with the world can be summed up in just 3 words: people are assholes. I would expand further and say that the work, deeds of numerous good people can be ruined by a single asshole. There are many successful small-scale communes throughout the world. The problems occur when you scale up to whole countries, where it is much more likely to evade accountability and promote corruption. This seems to be something of a trend. I don't know how accurate it is, but it seems like communist-type ideals tend to work as long as all the people have the same goals and desires generally. Just a heads up. Everyone answering this question operate under the impression that communism simply is when everyone share everything, or one power decide everything, which is why at the top you're only met with empty platitudes like it ignores human behavior, or that it just simply doesn't work on a large scale, without any further elaboration. Crazy how academics haven't caught up to these bombshell arguments yet, isn't it? I'm sorry, but Redditors with updates isn't going to provide a meaningful answer to your question. It's simply too complicated. You're better off browsing Wikipedia articles like the economic calculation debate or the local knowledge problem if you want anything close to any real discourse surrounding the issue. Not to mention the fact that the US has tried to destabilize every country getting too friendly with communism to fight the USSR. Communist governments didn't happen in a bubble. Because in order to thrive in a communist state we would need the majority of people to be on the same page and still actively contribute to society in such a way that most benefits the system rather than themselves. And people tend to mostly want to benefit themselves. Plus there would be a shit ton of folks who would intentionally try to make society fail and then blame it on the system rather than their collective efforts or lack thereof. Greater than plus there would be a shit ton of folks who would intentionally try to make society fail and then blame it on the system rather than their collective efforts or lack thereof. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? It requires that everyone be completely altruistic. Political leaders get into that position to try and make things better. Surgeons become surgeons because they want to, and have the aptitude for it. It requires that everyone know what they're good at and want to do what they're good at. Because of things like greed and scarcity of resources it just can't happen. The Earth of Star Trek is a good example of a perfect communist state. No one works for profit, they do it for joy. But they also have replicators which remove the need for any resources and power plants capable of keeping the world in 100% free renewable electricity. A chef becomes a chef because they want to cook. An engineer becomes an engineer because they want to develop the newest thing and gain their chapter in the history books. You should qualify that you mean classic Trek, not the Kelvin timeline. 'Cause the Kelvin timeline is no perfect state. Closing parenthesis. Read Utopia sometime. Humans fuck up everything in practice. Isn't Utopia the story about how everyone gets a slave? Hardly a good example. Because everyone has to agree to it to make it work, so it requires strict authoritarianism, which quickly makes it not fun. If you add authoritarianism to it then it becomes not communism anymore though. It doesn't scale well because people buy in to varying degrees. We may be born equal, but not everyone will put out equal effort or believe in central causes equally. Wanna see communism work? Start a commune of like-minded individuals and cap it at 100. Greater than we may be born equal. One of the major barriers is that we aren't born equal. Blank slate is thoroughly bunk. Even if it wasn't on a mental scale, it would be obviously false on a physical one. Different people have different capacities, different needs, different desires, different personality traits, etc. We are only all equal in the made-up sense of human dignity or moral worth. When it comes to the real work of dividing labor and distributing resources, we aren't born equal, and it's a real hard problem to divide labor and distribute resources in a way that everyone can actually agree is fair. It ignores human behavior. I don't get how proponents continue to miss the elephant in the room. So many people are shit. When you add the disincentive of having to share your shit with shit people, even good people become shit because it's not worth the effort. It works great if we were driver ants or some other worker bee, ant creature. But we're not. We're independent, fighty apes, with napalm and silly putty. The most common issue is that the CIA will orchestrate a coup of you try it. Lol. I had to scroll way too long to find the, because nearly every communist government has been sabotaged by US policy, answer. Iran is what it is because the people got a little too socialist. So the CIA installed a religious theocracy. You could say egoism, but it's just very naive to think that everyone will work the same, to receive the same share. Slackers and wrongdoers are everywhere, and that completely ruins the very basics of communism. If I am working 150%, you are working 90%, and he is working 60%, why is it a great idea that the three of us gets the same share? Edit. Naive to think that. You wouldn't get the same share in 99% of models. Karl Marx noticed communism working in farming communities, monasteries and in hunting and gathering groups. What he didn't realize though is that type of communal living only works in small groups that are fairly isolated. When you have a population all with different needs, abilities and personalities, things just don't work. People see others having more. And they want that too. There are also lots of jobs that need to be done that are pretty unpleasant, and people need incentives to work them. Most of the early communists that we think of as successful didn't promote communism so much but capitalism and socialism together. Yes, and the most important point here is that it works in certain farming communities and monasteries because everyone in those communities voluntarily gives up their private property. The moment you try to introduce communism as a system of government, you're by definition in the business of taking people's property from them by force, at gunpoint. The basic flaw is twofold. The first part being that people are not in fact equal in their abilities and such, and the second part being that way too many people will simply refuse to contribute since they don't have to because others will. From each according to his ability, to each according to his need. Find me one Marxist theorist who says that everyone is equal. Capitalism doesn't work very well in practice, either. So I wouldn't approach the question about communism so high level, i.e. as a way to organize an economy, but rather critique the elements commonly associated with its failings, which are more like authoritarianism or sabotage from outside forces. I don't think we have very good examples of communism in practice to be able to say it doesn't work. It's always been ruined by something that would ruin any society. Only 25% of Americans, and 11% of the total planet, think that capitalism is working, yet in the media and public discourse, you'd think it was much higher. It's really not much different than what happened in the Soviet Union when they put people in mental hospitals and invented the diagnosis of sluggish schizophrenia for anyone who thought the state was tyrannical. Capitalism leads to the same failures in efficient distribution of resources as any centrally planned government when you get a group of wealthy individuals who can control government through regulatory capture and legalized corruption. The major problem is that capitalism has not run its course. When you look at the history of communism, you see these agrarian economies revolt to communism without ever actually having passed through the phases of capitalism. Capitalism isn't just a thing you can skip over in the process. We will get many technological innovations from capitalism that will help us create a post-scarcity world. Once we get there, communism will be possible. Until then, all the incentives are wrong and the technological capabilities just aren't there. Read more on Fully Automated Luxury Communism, Falk. Marx and Engels never saw communism as a state of society that could be made. They saw it at the end state that occurs only once you've passed from primitive communalism to slave society to feudalism to agricultural capitalism to industrial capitalism to socialism to communism. I think we have a couple more stops in the industrial world before we transition to the next. That says nothing of the rest of the world, which is not in the endgame at all of capitalism. A lot of people are viewing communism from a purely capitalist viewpoint. It's true that people wouldn't be motivated to put in the work to become brain surgeons if they got paid the same as delivery drivers. But a delivery driver working 60 hours a week who still can't feed their family isn't going to be motivated either. There are intermediate versions of socialism around the world that seem to give their people a better quality of life. However, capitalist societies are resistant to those measures because they have been brainwashed into believing that success is just about hard work and choices while never acknowledging the role that opportunity has. Yeah, lots of just doesn't work. Can't work. Oh well, comments here. There's trillions of dollars and thousands of lives that have been sacrificed to fighting communism. All these folks just acting like it was an experiment done in a glass jar and not in a world that had been fighting it tooth and nail. Never mind people coming to power by promising communism and then not delivering communism. Edit. A word. Communism is based upon people being decent humans. People are not decent humans. Also, for countries like the US, only 43% of people pay income tax. So each person who currently has a job would have to contribute enough to support a little over 2 people. They are not, because they live under capitalism where being decent is neither encouraged nor rewarded. Incentive to excel. For one example, if every lawyer gets paid the same amount, regardless of if they're good at their job or not, then there's no incentive for them to try their hardest. All the extra effort and hard work will still only pay the same as the lawyer doing just enough to get by. It's not about being paid the same as in a communist society. There is no money, so it would be food, housing, whatever else. You got the right idea though. Emo. Like most human system theories, they expect humans to be identical widgets. Not at all. From each according to his ability, to each according to his need. You will find no Marxist theorist saying that everyone is equal or should receive equal compensation. People should be fairly compensated. People who can work but don't, i.e. the capitalist class, shouldn't receive anything. A big problem is scale. Communism works great in small groups, where social pressure matters a lot and it's easy to keep track of people's activities and who owns what or who owes what to whom. Once you start scaling up, the human brain can't handle it and you need dedicated systems to manage and maintain, and those systems can always be corrupted or broken or just plain inefficient. It's easy to split things evenly between 20 people, or even 100. But when you're talking about distributing resources to millions of people in a fair and equitable way, so far that has proven close to impossible. It doesn't help that many of the highest profile efforts calling themselves communist in the 20th century had no desire to actually implement communist ideas and were naked power grabs by the people undertaking them. Mainly because nobody owns shit, so nobody takes care of shit, because they have no incentive to do so. Now, if aside from distributing the work, also the profits would be shared fairly, it would be very different.